Hi, welcome to the Tomosi Business Series. Thank you for joining us. We are still continuing with our topic on the 7 key drivers of enterprise competitiveness. In our last 2 sessions, we covered the first, which was productivity levels and efficiencies, where we learned that businesses remain small and constricted when their production levels are low. They are not able to take advantage of the innovation and technology to exploit opportunities and to get into the market and market segments. And this week, we cover the second key driver of enterprise competitiveness, which is skills and qualifications. We look forward to receiving your feedback through our email, info@tapmedia.com, and our social media handles. Enjoy!
So I want to admit today that often I'm embarrassed when I meet young business leaders, young and upcoming. They are at a particular rank, but they sound as if the rest of the political, social, and cultural world that surrounds them matters nothing to them. They don't care. As long as the task or job they're engaged with at hand is profitable, regardless of whether they are in the shrinking market, regardless of whether they are engaged in an environmentally destructive enterprise, or there is no further innovation, the enter is not growing. Regardless of all these reasons, for them, their focus is on what I'm doing. However destructive it is, I don't care. Now, the question I ask is, how will you help your entire social and economic apparatus of your country? Because we have a basket that we all live in called Uganda and Africa. How will you build its economic apparatus, social apparatus, so it stops leaking revenues, leaking minerals, leaking and never growing? If you, as an entrepreneur, you don't take time to study history and understand and have context, how will you as a business person, project and participate in tomorrow? How will your market be shaped? And what forces do you think will shape this market? If your interest is only in the quick mereyalero, who said that to be a business person, one needs to check out at the door their intellect, their thinking, and analysis of the broader issues shaping society as soon as they enter business? I believe that's not a good thing. That's why I use history and context in these sessions. So let's just get a little bit of understanding now so we can get into skill and qualifications as, tools, drivers of competitiveness. Between the date March 10th, 1900, the historians know what that date means in Uganda. That's when the Buganda Agreement was signed, that put Buganda and later progressively other nationalities, Busoga, Toro, Ankole, Bunyoro, I can go on and on. Progressively, these were put into colonial hands after the March 10th, 1900 agreement. So between that date, March 10th, 1900 agreement, and March 1st, 1961, when Uganda held the first elections for self-government to prepare for independence in October 1962. This is a period of about 61 years. In this period, 5 different social classes, out of which a Uganda in which entrepreneurs were expected to build skills and qualifications, emerged. These social classes is now our raw material where we pick the people to build skills and competencies. The first class was the military. Class 1, military, recruited largely from the northern parts of our country, in Lango area, in Acholi, in West Nile, in societies that we say were acephalous. Acephalous societies means that those societies didn't have a centralized system of government by the time the country was parceled up piece by piece by the colonialists. Look, the colonizer had a plan, and our people didn't have any. The colonizer assumed that in parts of the world where they needed to source raw materials cheaply among nationalities that were not highly centralized, the colonizer decided he would discourage any form of a rallying point for the population. And here, rallying point, I mean having a king. If you have a king and you have a standing army, this is what you rally to in face of danger. But if you have an acephalous community where there is unstructured and centralized relationships, there is no rallying point. Why did they object the rallying point? Because they suspected that a rallying point would be an obstruction and a source of resistance to their invasion plans. This is why in India, for example, they picked a group called the Gurukas. The Gurukas, they trace their roots to an 18th and 8th century Hindu warrior. His name was Guru Gokarnath. They picked that group as warriors to colonize India. When they came to central part of Africa and Malawi, they looked for people called the Yao. When they came to Uganda and Kenya and Sudan, they looked for the Luo people in northern Uganda and western Kenya. The assumption was that if these groups are given a rifle, this rifle would become their form of social mobility, and their loyalty would be entirely to the British colonizer and not to their indigenous leaders. They called these groups martial tribes. And indeed, by 1961, Idi Amin, who was the highest ranking commissioned officer at the level of lieutenant, he was the head of a whole illiterate army. Even if one wanted to use the army to build particular skills, say in engineering, in construction, in medical research, as we have seen in other countries like Egypt, like Europe, armies are a source of good, source of change, because that's where innovation starts from. Even if you want to do that in Uganda, there was no ground to start from. There was no soil to plant anything within those 60 years that Uganda was being formed. This is social class number one. Social class number two, created in these 61 years. Young people, listen to me carefully, because Uganda did not start in 1986 with MTN. They did not start in 1986 with DSTV. These are all new things I hear today, but this is how your country was formed, the country you now call Uganda. The second social class created in the process of state formation in our country was the public officials, the civil servants, a new class. We didn't have it prior 1900. I have picked in my reading some stories that indicate that the institution of the Katikiro, the institution of Kamarabyonna, because in Bunyoro they call I saw speak in the writing calling him Kavirabyona in 1862, which was some 30 years before 1900. There seems to have been a bit of emerging public service, but it was very low, if we want to believe what we read from John Huntington Speaks' diary. Now, so these public officials as an institution, they were picked from the sons of religious leaders, princes, kings, and queens of various parts, especially in the center of Uganda, in the east, and in the west. Many of the first civil servants, for example, from Nkore, where I have a bit of good knowledge, and Buganda, and Toro, they were all products of either religion or the kingdoms, and their children went on to missionary schools, and they formed the first cluster of the administrators as the British colonial enterprise began to roll up. The point is, if you are not a mwanawani, it would be difficult to get into school, and let alone in the administration. Almost all the early under-secretaries, permanent secretaries, commissioners, administrators were children of the notables. So this is cluster or social class number two in those years 1900, 1961. The third new social class, because there are five, the third new social class were the landed gentry in Buganda, in Nkore, in Bunyoro, parts of Busoga, and in Toro. Now, for example, this one will help you understand how we got the gentry class, the landed class. In order to remove the standing army from Buganda, because Buganda had held a standing army for a long time, and give the king some minimum level of comfort and protection, the British agreement gave a force of about 50 soldiers and some 20 or so rifles to the king. I want you to imagine a king who has held his army for more than 500 years, even the rite of initiation by any young person at the time was joining the army. And suddenly now all these people have no further social mobility and ascent. If you picture that, then you have a full picture of Buganda, Nkore, Toro, parts of Bunyoro in those 61 years, 1900, and just at the eve of our independence. Now, in the place of this role, the British, in the place of the role of this standing army that Nkore, Bunyoro, Toro, Buganda had, the British introduced a new contractual relationship. And this was very unprecedented. They called this contractual relationship Milo. That's how you have Milo land. It was a reward and an incentive to various chiefs and leaders in order to avoid opposition to the British rule and to collaborate better in attacking other acephalous parts of Uganda that didn't have a centralized administration. But by doing that, a new class was created. There was a study that was done by the colonial government. If you look at colonial government files in Entebbe, that study was done in Nkore, in Buganda and Toro in 1913, early 1913. It shows that much of the Milo lands that were given, they fell in places which were already occupied by the population. They were not empty lands. The purpose of donating land which is already occupied by people, the purpose was to allow this new social class, this new caliber of chiefs and their supporters to be able to earn an income by collecting tenancy fees. Remember, there was no musala. Tebakuwa musala before, you only served in the army, but now you have land and you need to collect fees called usuru from those wretched peasants who owned the land and occupied these lands since their birth, obviously. This is category number 3, created between 1900 and 1961. The fourth category of social class was initially transient, meaning that they are temporary, they are going through, but the group settled in Uganda and they led the conduct of business and the early shoots of manufacturing. These are the Afro-Asian Groups. The Afro-Asian Group, they owned shops across many parts of the emerging towns and cities. You can imagine a shop in Koboko, as well as a shop in Rukunjiri, as well as a shop in Tungamo, as well as a shop in Kasese. All these with Asians, Ugandan Asians of Asian origin. They are bringing goods and services in those peasant populations. Now, they sold merchandise, they bought and processed cotton and coffee, they exported tobacco and tea. To this social group was reserved the right to buy these commodities from the African peasants who grew them. This, as many of you who care to read, was the initial spark of the economic and political riots beginning in 1945 to 49, led by Ignatius Musazi, Kangave, our hero at Kololo, and many others. This marked the journey to the demand for opening the gates for independence. The demand was really initially the fight for the right of Africans to gin cotton, like the Indians were doing, to remove marketing boards, which was creaming off 38%, you can imagine, of the total price of cotton grown in Busoga, grown in other parts of the country. 38% was going off from the price given to the peasants. This was number 4 social class created between 1900 and 1961. The fifth social class number 5, category number 5, was the massive peasantry who were locked in subsistence agriculture across the country. They made up 94% of the population by 1969 when I was born. So 6% of our population was in the money sector. 94% when I was born, they were all surviving on the land, just growing food for eating.
We would like to hear from you. Please email us at info@tapmedia.com and visit our website at www.tapmedia.com. You can also visit our offices located at Tomosi Business Park, Luzira, Port Bell Road, or call 0414 220 702. Thank you.